Yeah, I believe that we're all good to go. So we're just going to start the debate by inviting first the first speaker from Affirmative. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, let me set up my timer first. And for gender pronouns, I'd like to be called he, him. Um, let's just start then. We scroll up. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Why is the prevalent notion in our generation is that office work is inherently parallel to purgatory? People hate themselves and hate their jobs, and now the goal of many people in our society is to be free, to do anything but a 9 to 5 job that pays well. This, we think, is inherently rooted in man's individualistic desire to plunge himself into greatness without care for anyone around him. That is why work sometimes feel like a hell of endless competition, with the final objective of life being reaching the highest position, even if it means sacrificing people along the way. Our job in this debate as government, then, is to prove why the narrative of workplace as a space of collective responsibility is more preferable because of two things. First, it increases the workflow and work quality. Second, it lessens office politics and office relations, which leads to lessening society's narrative on work being in the same level as a human purgatory. 3 points of setup. First, we need to clarify the purpose of a workplace in general. It is quite obvious that a company or workplace wants to create goods, and they want to create goods as quickly and in as high as a good quality that they can produce them. If we want to create efficiently, then the most reasonable course of action is to have workplace as a space of collective responsibility. Each person has their own, a lot of people has one responsibility, and they work as a team towards a common goal, even if they have different ways of achieving their goal. Their goals are the same, but they don't have to have the same ways of achieving this. Second, what does individualism or individualistic gain mean in their house in opposition? It is focusing on yourself and not caring others around you and the impact that you give to them. That is individualism. At the end of the day, the goal of individualistic gain is to reach the highest position, even if it means sometimes, not always, but sometimes sacrificing those whom at the past you've called a teammate. Why does this happen then? We think that this happens because society is reaching a sort of late stage capitalism. Companies are getting greedy. Social welfare are becoming non existent, increasing nepotism because they prioritize individual gain and they become more prone for chasing reward without paying attention to the company's well being. Yes, individualistic gain also reduces the company's well-being, and this I will explain more in my arguments. Third and last point of setup is that we need to clarify what an office structure would look like in our world. There will be a lot of departments, okay? And each department, we're saying that collective responsibility is available in each and every one of those departments. So we don't mix marketing and HR and say that they have the same responsibilities. The mechanism is clear. Responsibilities is divided according to the specialty which each workers produce in a company. Moving on to my argument. First argument is that why is this good? Why do we prefer the narrative of a workplace as a collective, as a place for collective responsibilities? First, it increases workflow and the quality of work. Before we move on, let's see what selfishness or individual gain brings you. You focus more on yourself. You want to reach the highest place as possible. And at the end of the day, you work only to reach a high position. You work with your teammates, but you don't count on them as teammates. You don't see them as friends and brothers who are reaching towards a common goal. First of all, this is underlyingly a mistake in someone's way of thinking that could decrease their quality of work. How does this decrease their quality of work? Well, first of all, they will hog job positions. If they hog job positions, they will do as much work as they can, even though they are not specialized in that work. Because this is a collective workflow, in our side is then it is divided equally as I've explained in the setup. Everyone has their own task to do and everyone is incentivized. There's this incentivization to finish them as quickly as possible because at the end of the day, the team's gain is also your gain. So your objective is not mainly for yourself, but your team's gain because your team's gain become your gain at the same time. What does this look like? How does this increase the workflow and quality of work? Well, okay, as we've mentioned before, collective responsibility. This will give incentive for people to take part more in office culture and collective responsibility. Everyone has to tell each other where they're good at and where they are bad at. In individual gain, every man lives for himself. Say employee A, he wants to do every work, and if he does every work, even though he's not good at it, at the end of the day, there will be a bad company stigma. If the performance of the company and the workflow is reduced, other companies will see this and see that the work this company is doing is not as well as they could have been. Because of this one person, who's not capable, who's not working to his best, because is actually not his specialty. What does the example look like on our side? If the goal is to earn $1 million, for example, employee A will find businesses that can generate the revenue. Employee B will try to find suitable places in the current market. Employee C develop employees A's and B's plan into reality. Employee D and E will run this business. And the last person, employee F, will report and make a big conclusion as an overall wrap-up and as an evaluation of the works that they have done and the works that they could have improved on. The line of work is obvious judge, and each team member will then, because it is a collective responsibility, act as a check and balance if something does not work according to plan, or if in the workflow something is halted. If A is not doing his job well, then C cannot do his job. So what does this have? What happens then is that the teamwork, because they're working towards a common goal, then there is a potential that C will check on A, what is going on. And this will create a more bonded and a better relationship in general, and a better office environment. Which leads to my second argument. What does this do in our side then? This lessens office politics, because how does this look like? Why does this increase lessens office politics? Because you want your friends, you want your teammates, you want the people who have the same goal as you to reach the top the same way as you did. So at the end of the day, you are not trying to reach the highest position alone, but then you become happy. You become encouraged if you see your friends that work the same way you did reaching that higher position with you. Office culture is not inherently bad, but here it is mandatory. To survive in the workplace, you can't do anything by yourself because you need communication with your team. And this will improve the company internally, which is individually, and externally, which is how other companies see the work of this company. How does this increase us internally? First, internal. You show that you are capable of employee A is doing a good work, then employee B and C and D and so on. They will know that employee A has been doing a good work. They will know. And so you will have good personal reputation in general. You did not want to reach this for individual gain, but you were actually working collectively. But at the end of the day, this sort of gain is still at the end of the day tied to you, tied to your individual. So we can achieve this in our house by working collectively for one responsibility. Externally, how does this look? Companies will see that your company has a good record because everyone is doing as they should be doing. Then your company will have a good record, and more companies will be more confident in investing and spending money in a company who's doing good. At the end of the day, this increases the work environment. This lessens the office politics. This betters the office culture. It makes you enjoy work because what you're doing is you're trying to achieve this as a collective. Better office culture means you're enjoying work, which means at the end of the day, the society's narrative that work is purgatory, that 9 to 5 is nothing but hell, that doesn't need to survive and to live in the woods because of the bad narrative that work has given them, will lessen. Proud to propose.
All right, thank you first, affirmative, for that fine opening. Now to open the case from negative, inviting first negative. Here.
Am I audible?
Can you retry speaking?
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, wait. Give me 1 second. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. social evil still exists in status quo, in which are capitalism in and of itself. Therefore, individuals who are vulnerable, for example, who are living out of their works by making paycheck to paycheck gains, for example, they are the one who are the most vulnerable ones, who need to climb up the ladder, who needs to gain the individual gains, who need to be credited by their own work, who need not to be blamed by collective work just because there is a free rider, for example. And they are the one who can and the only controllable elements are are themselves. There are their skills, for example. Therefore, we want to prioritize it to at least dictate or to at least make their future better to some extent. Few points of setup before moving on to my argument. We said that what we want is the individual focusing on themselves, choosing job that can improve their skill, for example, where our counterfactual look like one, workers prioritize individual gains. This also included things that they said, such as coordination, because you know that coordination is a prerequisite for good outcome of a job, therefore a prerequisite for individual gains from the very beginning. This also looks like climbing up the ladder, networking, for example, and not working, even not wanting to work overtime because it can impact that harmfully impacted your mental well-being, for example. Therefore, you cannot do any individual gains at later. All of these exist on our side. But secondly, we said teamwork or team projects still exist on our side, but comparatively it is different because we prioritize one's own work's quality, where it is if necessary, we will help to improve the team because we know the prerequisite of good outcome of a job is a good teamwork also. But we said that comparatively on our side there will be less micromanaging, in which are if there is an individual who are problematic, for example, or a free rider, for example, do not want to do his jobs, we said that it is blame on that individual, not blame on collectively. Therefore, it is easier for you to not micromanage other individuals that may affect your reputations within the work, and etc. It is easier on our side because we prioritize our own self, we fix ourselves if we have problems, and etc. But moving on then, all rebuttals will be integrated within my arguments. First argument then, well, we said that affirmative word do not credit individual enough, therefore it limits individuals opportunity to gain leverage within work field. The premise is simple. We said that collective responsibility makes work not effective, therefore individual gains diminish. First reason, we said that the reward are distributed. Reward from job are very much distributed equally to a collective, since it is a collective responsibility. This is worse for individual who want to gain a living with their work, for example, but it is harder for them to actually climb up the ladder to where majority of the time they need a double or triple their actual income, for example. They are within the sandwich generation, for example, or there is this unfair system of capitalism that needs you to climb up the ladder, therefore you need that promotion, for example. But if you are not credited, for example, if you're not credited by your work, it is harder for you to climb up the ladder, for example. It's harder for you to gain income for your living, for your own living, for example, because the reward or the credit are distributed, and it's harder for you to stand out within the work field, or to stand out to your higher ups, for example. But two, we said on worst case scenario, if there's things such as free rider, for example, individual that are problematic, we said that they will be blamed collectively, ladies and it is also your fault because you cannot micromanage other individual that are problematic. I will dive deep this later, why individual that are problematic doesn't solve by this narrative solely, but by gating a blame collectively, higher ups will use this narrative to blame you also. And this is an extra factor that you can control, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe individual has their own experience that make them a problematic individuals, but you can control them. It is an extra factor, and it's harder for you to actually gain a living from this. Comparatively, it is more better on our side because one, we give more credit to individuals' work. If individuals do more than their job, for example, or the quality are expected from the work field in and of itself, we say that we give them credit because it is indeed an individual responsibility, or it is indeed not a collective responsibility. And we know that individuals on our side will prioritize that because work is solely for individual gains, ladies and gentlemen. We said that this will be better and crucial because it will be an accumulated benefit or compounding benefit at the end, because it can make us we can be a highlight within the work field, for example. It can make a good image for us within the work fields. But second, even on worst case scenario, where the work output aren't that good, we said that the blame at least doesn't distributed equally. The blame are distributed to the one who are needs to be blamed, ladies and gentlemen, the one who are problematic. And this is also a way for us not to blame ourselves. For example, it limits our capacity to work more on ourselves. And lastly, it is more easy for us to evaluate, ladies and gentlemen, because we can fix ourselves if we are to blame. For example, if our work are not as much as the higher ups expected to be, we can easily evaluate ourselves, because the higher ups can pinpoint which are the problem, in which are our individual problems. It can easy to evaluate for ourselves. We can fix ourselves instead of blaming on others, on other people. But second argument then, we said that why on workplace dynamics that are happening in status quo, that also they always champion, are worsen if this narrative exists in status quo. The premise is simple. The narrative won't fix anything that they champion. First, if the problem is co-worker that are not efficient, we said that the root of the problem is things such as recruiting problem, where they don't maintain a strict policy on recruiting. Therefore, they recruit these people who are not efficient, who are problematic, for example, etc. But also B, it is individual problem are unique to individual reasons. Things such as they are not capable enough to do their job, for example, or external factors that intervene with their work, for example. Therefore, this narrative just will not increase the quality of individual, but only on base case scenario increase guilt, because it is collective. One individual problems will increase guilt because it is a collective responsibility. But on the worst case, but it's even worse on their side, because higher ups, for example, or the company cannot pinpoint which are the problem, which are the core problems. One individual problems become collective responsibility, and yes, they cannot pinpoint the exact root of the problem. But second, if the problem was unfair and exploitative, we said that sharing responsibility wasn't an excuse for higher ups to minimize your work. It only distribute your responsibility, not the work. Comparatively, it is very better on our side, because workers are more efficient, where their problems can be fixed and can be pinpoint, because there is a real consequences. For example, if you mess up in the working field. But if the workplace are exploitative, you can also leave, because you know that it is not contributive to your individual gain. Under all of those reasons, you should oppose.
All right, thank you so much, first negative, for the fine opening. Now standing the case from affirmative, inviting second affirmative. Here.
Before I start, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Please tell me if I'm buffering, because I got disconnected few minutes ago. I'm starting my timer in 3, 2, 1. So before I start with the company perspective, I will start with the human nature itself. So when only some individuals are rewarded, let's say, combined with people's selfish desire and a special goal, it reinforces the idea that of a workplace solely as a site of individual gain rather than a space of collective responsibility. This dynamic or issue frequently creates a competition or rivalry that not only reduce collaboration, also quality, which is the main clash of this debate, right? So we are focusing on the competition in the issue, and also how the domination can destroy the company's workplace health. And then we are also talking about the contributing meaningfully, but it also somewhat demotivate those who are eager to learn simply to make progress because of the dilemation. Let's say I will elaborate on later. So those who are less controlling, this is the human nature by the way. Those who are less controlling or doesn't have that big desire to do their individual desires or personal ambition, they may feel undervalued, and which discourages them from offering new ideas. So even if they have the perspective, etc., but they can still lose by the others' personal ambition. How? Because there's a thing called dominant uh, perspective. So instead of fostering, we are trying to focus on the shared growth. The environment becomes centered on individual advancement is bad, even for the company and the workplace health itself. So what exactly is my rebuttal? First of all, on the problem of freelancers or people who don't work and still get the credit. So work performance outside has unique case in which we have check and balance for all of the employees' work. So it is not focusing on one perspective. So even if the team fails, it will be easily to deduce who work less or doesn't criteria that they have given, while individual doesn't have this clean out mechanism. So my second rebuttal, so they talk about work quality. Yes, that's everyone goal. That is our main point too. But our side is more healthy because we are trying to point out about the bad of the human nature when this happen. So another rebuttal is it is harder to stand out. Well, however, we have said that in our side of the house that working collectively and working with a common goal first give you a proper mindset. It gives you a better quality work and working experience. And we said that if you do good in the team, other people will know because of the work flow calls for it. Other people work as a check and balance. So yes, even though problematic individual exists, but if the company itself, if individual based, will not give them more freedom to balance. So the responsibility doesn't mean equal punishment. This is why about the check and balance itself. So yes, we agree that individuals are different, like the problem, etc. But in our mechanism, it is about the collective responsibility. In this case, it is the same outcome but different approach. So going into my argument, so we are going to talk about the human interaction as in how this our arguments can actually lessen nepotism and corruption. So nepotism or um, let's say going to certain position because of certain relation, etc., is likely to happen because there is no favoritism, which means some kind of bias. So equal work means people are allowed to work based on their strength and weaknesses. I mentioned before, it's about collective responsibility, not making them forced to do the same thing. It is about the outcome itself. So even if there happens, as I mentioned before multiple times, there's a check balance. At least the goal that they are chasing will be more collective. When a company are more individual, it will be more chaotic because there are a lot of different goals. In general, humans have different ambition, right? So I will focus on what nepotism, what exactly is the actor and corruption, how does it correlate? So nepotism basically that when uh, certain people go up because of certain reason and a similar goal, despite it not aligned with company of value, and it creates corruption. It is actually the main way for them to grow, as it is common in Indonesia, let's say, where there's a lot of companies where corruption is common or even normalized because there's a certain individual word or responsibility since they don't feel the sense of belonging and the care of people. Yes, despite working is for their own benefits, we have to look at the society function. Don't we can be selfish all the time. So what are the other point? So the opposition say it may to focus wait, so they may focus on the performative qualities, yes, but there are also other qualities such as the teamwork or the logic itself. So we're not saying it's bad, we're saying it can cause the for the long term, as mentioned by the first speaker or the deputy prime minister, as in the healthy environment. So if there's a conflict going on everywhere, etc., even as small as possible, the company will collapse. Why? Because they have different ideas, and let's say the problem cannot be solved because of the different ideas. Yes, and then it actually undermines overall work quality because they focus on the individual, right, based on the our current argument. But however, with collective responsibility, we are focused on work quality, we also can focus on the individual uh, capability. So individual responsibility, let's say, it gives immediate satisfaction, but little lasting skill. So this the model proposed by the opposition create a competitive culture, quantity creating great conflict, and even for the higher ups, even for the bosses. So what exactly is the good example or the bad example? So our good example for active responsibility is most health and pharmacy sector, right? Even though they have a different capabilities, different major, they have the same collective responsibility. They have the good coordination, they have the guts. So it is a contrary way to delete the problem that stated by the opposition. So what is the bad side of example? So we're talking about the freelance community as in the ad sector is one of the example of why collective responsibility is success. So imagine this, in the freelance community, art sector, they are focusing on getting reward as much as possible based on their own skill. It sounds good at the first, right? But the market itself, it doesn't grow because it focuses on the one person itself. It is so common, like for example, certain artist A priced their art only for $1, while the other art only prices for 10. Even though yes, the $10 art is more good, but the $1 art is more looked at because it is more cheaper and etc. So it is about how to go the differences in market etc. It creates a branch that can potentially collapse the sector itself. So what happens if that? What happens in that? Or there is no collective responsibility. It is prone to riot, like people leaving because they don't feel satisfied in their lack of work and company sustainability goals. So it is all full of selfishness that doesn't care about how the society functions itself. So why? Because nepotism happens because they want to get rewards first. So individualism in the system can make it worse. So my second point about employee maintenance is actually significantly easier, especially about performance and welfare. So focusing on teamwork does not remove the incentive of individual. This is mentioned by the deputy prime minister. Argument. So people work at their own space. Like for example, A is in marketing, they're good, but some KK get promoted in finance because overall, first of all, they're good. Teamwork quality is good, and second of all, their individual capability. So the point is, we are still encouraging personal growth despite having collective responsibility. We are talking about the same actor again. So it is not about being selfish. So related to the previous one, corruption and nepotism lesson after a correct responsibility, the company can work more professionally as in clear transparency. It stops the company for going down for selfish, right? So at the end of the day, it's about how our side has stronger objectivity because the same goal and it can a fair improvement and little to no competition. Even if there's one, it is more controlled and also it prioritize the democratic system because it is one of the best idea nowadays. So that's why we uphold long-term benefit for the company and the social welfare despite living in a capitalistic system that actually should be revised. Proud to argue. Thank you.
All right, thank you, second affirmative, for that fine speech, extending the case from negative, invited second negative. Here.
The best workplaces are not ones where you are bound and tied to your coworkers and slave away for a vague reward of collective responsibility. Instead, it is systems that have accountability and reward individuals who put their blood, sweat, and tears into the work. So we urge affirmative time to be realistic. In this economy where it's so hard to survive, would rather individuals prioritize themselves and making sure that you're able to feed your families, which is why we oppose. 3 in the pattern rebuttals, but note a few will also be integrated within my extension. First are the terms of personal growth. I think this was severely explained in my LO speech, and yet the effort that was given to you coming from affirmative was only to symmetrize this because you clearly cannot. We've proven to you that there's larger incentives as a human being because we have a greater reward system. We realize that when we put a certain amount of work, we get something back. That is inherently what drives us to create things, to innovate better in the workplace. But secondly, the personal growth on affirmative also hinges on how well the team does, right? It is rated as to how well you are able to contribute towards this collective responsibility, which is harder to evaluate, which is something that they have yet mechanized to you and explain how exactly they are going to do that on their side. Second rebuttal then, affirmative tries to claim that they are able to lessen office politics, things like nepotism, etc. I'm gonna flip this entirely and tell you that office politics actually become worse on their side. This is because the narrative of collective responsibility shifts evaluations into, is A good team player? Do you think that C is working hard enough in the team? This creates things like, one, favoritism. You're likely to take the side of the friend you made when you started working, for instance, giving them better evaluations to your bosses, because this is inherently what we do, right? We flock to people who are more comfortable than us. We are likely to give better evaluations to people we care about. But secondly, things like identity-based alliance, which is extremely harmful, right, for minorities in workplaces who already have it hard enough, but now because they're the minority, people feel like there's a collective need to care for other people who are more alike to you, for instance, who have like a similar background towards you, and this is the alliances that you are likely to create then on Affirmative. The core idea of collectiveness in itself is already politics. It's allowing individuals to take leadership roles simply for the title, but not actually being able to live up to it. This also proves that it's harder to detect who actually failed to fulfill their burden on Affirmative. Do not let Affirmative get away with that one-liner response to the layers of the free rider argument that Thoriq gave you. Very lastly then, on corruption, two things. First, I feel like this is the very worst of the worst actors. I think it's also a very unstrategic and a massive burden on Affirmative to prove why this has gone on their side, which they've also barely given you an explanation as to how corruption is suddenly gone and everyone is a good person then on Affirmative. But secondly, I'm also gonna flip this anyways, because even if corruption happens, which we concede it probably will, there are still bad human beings. On our side, at least it's very clear who did it, right? And when you do find out who did it, simple, you fired them. This one individual will probably be able to get so many social sanctions. It will be so much harder for them to move on to another workplace because there's a lack of trust now embedded to their image. On Affirmative, with their narrative, it's so much harder to attack when it's for a collective responsibility. It gets blurry as to who did what, and you might even like rope people into this corruption problem in the first place, like innocent bystanders who didn't really do anything, which is exactly why my LO's argument is important, panels. Please do not let them get away with the unresponsiveness that they've been implying from the start of this debate. On to my extension then, I'm going to talk about toxic workplaces and how exactly we're able to prevent it under our narrative. While my first speaker brought to you how this manifests at an individual level, I'm going to extend this extension and explain the very horrendous but real situations and workplaces that can manifest and how exactly we are going to negate this. Why is this important? One, because to most individuals, work is a routine. It is something you do in order to survive. And furthermore, I think there are more people out there who hate their bosses more than there are liking their bosses, right? This is important because the rational, the normal adult mind won't suddenly hate someone or something without a justified cause or reason. And this is often because you have a boss that blurs your boundaries, for instance, that pushes deadlines without thinking that it's a Saturday night. And secondly, because one of the modern trends in workplaces is the idea of we are a family here, you are welcome, because this is a familial workplace type of situation, especially since the rise of work from home and the pandemic where people work ungodly hours in the middle of the night. There was a stronger need for connectivity because everyone was so isolated, right? What this means is an Affirmative, you are only strengthening this trend, while on negative, we give you a counter narrative. So there's a better check and balance in the workplace because obviously there are multiple narratives that exist, right? This clashes with the argument given to you by my LO, and I'll prove so, which flows really nicely to my next layers then. How are we actually able to achieve this? And this clashes with the idea of check and balance that they tell you. Firstly, because we enforce stronger professionalism. When this narrative is propagated, individuals then focus more on their performance as opposed to catching up too much with your coworkers' personal life or paying too much detail in their success rate or their KPIs for the month. Why is this important? What this narrative translates to is things like unpaid overtime, late night phone calls from your bosses, guilt tripping your workers, and this becomes extremely justified on Affirmative because the narrative is for collective responsibility. That's to say, what you want to achieve is a collective benefit on Affirmative. Your bosses try to justify you picking up your coworkers' slack because it's a collective responsibility. And if a person does not do it, that means someone has to pick up the slack or else this project won't run, for example. Comparatively, a workplace as a site of individual gain means respecting contracts and respecting boundaries, respecting work hours. It keeps relationships professional, which even though obviously it doesn't eliminate the possibility of terrible bosses existing in the workplace, it largely reduces the likelihood of bosses like crossing over your boundaries and crossing over your contracts. This is because even though there is something set in stone, like a contract, a written document, there are a lot of people who try to sort of tiptoe over the line. What we do is we provide a counter narrative that is able to prevent people and install this mindset that it is not okay and it is not justified for you to do that to your coworkers. But secondly then, on the idea of being able to shift workplaces easier on our side, the previous layer talks about how we are likely to reduce the likelihood of your bosses or your coworkers simply throwing more burden towards you that is outside of your individual burden or basically what you signed up for. This layer will tackle that even with the worst of the worst bosses, we are still able to help the workers escape this environment. How? Because first, in our side, when it's practically for individual gain, this means your boss needs to do other means, like paying you well, giving you more reasonable hours, because an individual gain means there is a level of give and take. You give a certain amount of effort, you expect your boss to be able to give you that amount of pay, for instance. This means when your boss is not doing accordingly to what you expect in the first place, you can leave. That is very rightfully so for you to leave. And especially with the narrative on our side that supports this means there's less mental guilt that exists in these individuals when they feel like they need to leave the workplace. But secondly, comparatively on affirmative, collective responsibility can trap workers in unhealthy loyalty structures. You make workers hesitate in leaving a job because you guilt them into thinking that they are not contributing and they're the reason a certain project fails. How you weigh this is at least there's a clearer metric for workers on our side. Collective responsibility is abstract, and with the lack of effort and characterization by affirmative, we think that it makes it so much harder for individuals to leave unhealthy workplaces when they are fed the narrative that they need to practically sell themselves for a collective benefit. What we want to champion here on negative side is we tell you the most harmed individuals in status quo right now are those workers who are working really long hours without gaining anything back and only having that vague positive impact of you're doing this for the greater good on affirmative, which is exactly what we want to counter. Very, very proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, second negative, for that fine speech. Now to have the last substantive speech from affirmative, inviting third affirmative. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, audible.
Okay, with that being said, I need to set up my timer. Okay. With that being said, I'd like to start my speech. I'd like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now, throughout this whole debate, the opposition side is only bringing the opposition side of the house is only bringing us one thing, and what it only focuses on one thing, and that is just to fulfill their own desires. But we believe this is not the case because, as we've said before, individualism won't stand in the current status quo and in the current next status quo. I would like to explain this more in my current classes as below. Now, first, the current classes that I would like to brought up is regarding the work culture in the both side of the house. But first of all, I would like to explain what our side of the house has brought out in this debate. Now, our side of the house has brought out far more beneficial causes to well-being of employees in the debate. With our case, companies will now fit their work burden to match each of their employees' strengths and weaknesses. Why this isn't a stigma is because of late-stage capitalism that forces people burden that may or may not fit their job description as a whole. My first speaker has stated this before in the status quo that late-stage capitalism is happening is the one of the main roots of the law. But opposition has not engaged in this and status quo as a whole. Now, this will give incentive to hardworking employees, since if they did their job well within the team, they will be rewarded. They will be rewarded because they did the job done and show efforts in team communication as well. This is also regarding to the response which I like to do, but later on. Now, second of all, the companies. What will this whole motion as a whole? Why this motion exists will impact the company, whether it's good or bad. Our side of the house, our side of the house gives off better benefits, since work in our side will be more productive and maintain employee satisfaction. So companies don't need to hire new employers for a replacement, for example. With productivity to the max, more work will be done, good company image, and so on and so forth. Work performance on our side has a unique case of which we have a check and balance for all of the employees' work. If the team fails, it will be easy to deduce who works less or don't. Because there are in the previous statement below, in the previous statement before, that there is a team effort. It is a general team effort. As the motion stated before, that this is a collective responsibility. So each people will given what each people will be given what task they should do and what task they should not do. Now, this is more beneficial in our case, since if we are in the same team as possible, people can see it'll be easier to deduce who works in those steps below. It'll be easier rather than individualism, since individualism as the since individualism only focuses on one thing but not the other. Because individualism only focuses on standing out making the job rather than finishing the job as a whole. Now, to extend that, to extend my previous clashes, work performance, to extend that, individualism will support unbalanced work, since people who works at the same job can give two different outputs regarding their own wants or their own talents, and their own needs. What I mean by this is that individualism risks the job that has been done doesn't coherently flow with other works, because and this will just make adjustment mandatory. And and the cause roots of that, this will be worse for the workflow as a whole. Even in the best case scenario where job is similar, cohesion and differences between those works will still exist, since individualism suggests people focuses on their own selves and diversify themselves. Because, well, individualism encourage people to stand out more, so that they can either get attention from other people, whether it's their higher ups or their colleagues as well. Now, Op tries to dis Op tries to discredit our debate by saying that we focuses on maintaining relations rather than work itself. This is entirely disingenuous from the opposition sides, since from the start till the finish, the goal and mechanism of which was a collective responsibility as a whole. It's not about the one of the benefits is the relationship. It's not one of the main goals. The main goal is, well, to take this responsibility and cater it to each person's strengths and weaknesses. Now, onto my responses. First of all, Op focus on individuals, of which they said that it won't restrict the workers since they are given leverage to work. But this is not exclusive to their side, since our side of the house also gives this benefit, of which by giving people a collective responsibility, restriction of work won't exist, since our house focuses on doing the work with each of the person's capability at mind. Individualism at which pushes people into a rat race. And we don't want that, since rat races only just influence that office politics as a whole. And then second of all, they say that unhealthy loyalty. If we're talking about unhealthy relationship, we mention nepotism. Even if it happens, it's a problem related to HR or related to other departments, not the whole idea of collective responsibility. To finish up my debate, on our side of the house, the government on why we should win this debate as a whole. First of all, we have given you a better benefit in this debate for not only the employees but also the company as well. Not only to maintain the employees' social welfare, but also the company's benefit, not only revenue but also, well, employers as well. We also have a better mechanism, since, as we said before, and throughout this whole debate, through teamwork, people will be more encouraged to do better, because, well, humans are social creatures, as we all know, and people will want to fulfill other people's standards, while individualism only focuses on yourself. So those standards only set by yourself and not others. Because of that, people will just either can make an excuse of it, even if you say that it's their job, they can just have asset or something. Not only that, we also have a check and balance, while opposition doesn't in this case of the house. And with that being said, we as the government side of the house would like to propose. Thank you.
Right, thank you, third affirmative, for the fine speech. Now inviting third negative. Here.
Hi, test. Am I audible?
Audible.
Okay, wait, yeah, give me like a few seconds. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. The biggest question to me is who affirmative really wants to defend. Because if it were true that they want to defend workers the most, then I don't see why they would want to prioritize having the good image of the company. There was no exclusivity coming from the case of affirmative, and I'm going to break this down into two parts. First, on efficiency, and then secondly, on accountability. So first, on efficiency then, I'm just directly going to concede to all of affirmative's claims, and I'm going to try and weigh out every single benefit coming from them. So the metric here is whether or not which side is able to get efficiency and the likelihood of efficiency in itself. Under affirmative, insofar as you want to believe their case, here are a couple of reasons to believe why that's not going to happen. First, insofar as it is true that you have
efficiency, it becomes disadvantageous under their side of the house for two main reasons. First, the distribution of the task responsibility means that you dilute the pressure that you give towards every single member of the team. What this means then is that you have individuals who do not care as much because the moment they do mess up, they are able to shift the blame and they know that they are able to slack off, given that the amount of blame that they receive under their side of the house is not going to be that big. Rather, it is going to be blamed on the team as a whole, which means that you have more incentive to slack off than under their side of the house because you understand that you're not going to get pressured that much because other individuals are also at stake. It's not only you yourself. But B, it's the fact that you rely on everyone being good, which we would posit is like first, not always the case because as we posit to you, there are always going to be free riders in the company, people who just do not contribute to the teamwork whatsoever. And in that case, we do not think Affirmative has done any sufficient analysis to prove why in that scenario they are able to thrive. But number two, we do think that often like insofar as you do have good people, this leads to more and more discussions, for example, on who has better ideas. But we think this is bad because insofar as you do create much more discussions, for example, this means that you need to reach a compromise, which I don't think Affirmative has done any sufficient analysis to prove why this is so. But even if it's not true that you have like longer time to do these tasks, I do think that the idea of micromanaging everyone's task is going to be so much more tiresome than under Affirmative, given that you have to make sure that this is going to be complete because your responsibility is not only to your work but also everyone's work, right? And so I think that insofar as there is efficiency, it is going to be so much more slower given that everyone is able to slack off. But number two, it's the idea that you also need to take care of everyone else's work, which also hinders your own like productivity in the workplace. But number two, it's also the concession of conforming to everyone else. When you do the run of the mill jobs, for example, you have no incentive to focus on like improving the quality of your own individual work. We think this means that A, you give the idea that these workers are just a cog in the machine. You do not credit their own exclusive work, for example, which means that you're making them settle for mediocrity, right? At this point, then, we do not see why workers are going to be so much more productive than under Affirmative. But B, it's the idea of you having to manage other people's work. The fact that as Affirmative concedes, you have your own specialized skills. The moment you try to shift this into a collective task, that's when you force someone to work outside of their own respective fields, which means that it hinders you also individually in order to work much better, and therefore you're not going to get a good experience in your work field. Under the comparative, then, why do we get efficiency? Three main reasons. First, there's internal check and balance, and it's so much better. I want to posit that A, sure, of course, there is always external pressure coming from your upper, like your bosses. This is symmetric. But B, more crucially and exclusively under negative, is that this narrative focuses on your individual selves and your gain, which is better because one, this directly ties to your survival. You have fear of being fired and therefore not being able to get your pay for the month and not being able to eat and pay your rent. This is going to motivate you much more rather than just your higher ups telling you to work. But two, I just want to posit the fact that humans internalize negative emotions with larger emphasis out of fear that people are going to judge them because they do not want to be seen as someone who is unproductive. And we therefore think, insofar as gaining reputation is a individual gain, that is when you motivate yourself to work harder. But two, there's always going to be pushed to be better under our side of the house simply because number one, it ties your individual survival to get whatever it is you want. And so when you see that something as a key or a pathway to your own happiness, that's when you get to be much better under our side of the house. But number two, it's the perception that all workers want to opt in into this narrative, for example. This means that you compete with other people in order to make sure that you're able to be better than everyone else. But third and lastly, even if you want to believe our worst case, and it is truly that bad, A, there is still a benefit of individual growth. You still focus on yourself and in individual work, you're able to improve. But B, I would flip and explain to you why this specialization of workers are just not going to be that efficient. We've proven this before. Second clash then on accountability. First, I'm just going to directly weigh this on two different scales. First on likelihood and then scale. First on likelihood then. Even if you want to believe affirmative's best case, I think A, it is at best diluted insofar as someone messes up. It is going to be blamed at the negligence of everyone, which implies two things. First, this worsens the politics because when you work overtime out of someone else's issue or mistake, you're going to get mad at that person. And that's how you worsen office politics under their side of the house. Because even if you still do things right, insofar as there's still a mistake, you are going to get lectured at by your boss. But two, it does affect your performance. The moment you always get blamed for something you are not responsible for, that's when you do start to get lazy with your work. You start to not care about your work, and that's what affects your productivity. But B, even if you want to believe accountability still happens, it's the way this narrative manifests, as Cheche explains. This looks like family narratives, asking you to be a team player and just forgive them for the day. But see, the fact that there are identity alliances amplify this worsening politics, because the fact that there are now groups of people wanting to pin up against each other means that you're not going to get the accountability that you want because they prioritize themselves. On the comparative, we get this because one, responsibility is directly targeted. Accountability is easily achieved because you know someone made a mess and they should be reprimanded for that. But number two, as we posit, there is professionalism, and you therefore have a much more bigger emphasis on wanting to stay professional and therefore target people who do create messes. But third and lastly, even if you want to believe our very worst case, at least under our side of the house, insofar as you do not get accountability, you are not chained with guilt of being able to leave your workplace. You are able to directly leave because you don't see that as something that is inherently emotionally intertwined with your life. Lastly, on scale, it becomes so much worse because first, as we posit, the team player narrative makes nepotism and favoritism become so much worse because you are unable to pinpoint who is it that is wrong. You are instead asked to evaluate each other as affirmative posits. But the moment you retaliate, this becomes so much more unfair because you are now branded as someone who is not a team player and do not feel a part of the family. And so therefore, insofar as you do get accountability, it is performative and does not cater to you. On the comparative, when we push for professionalism in the workplace and an individual gain, that's when you're able to reprimand people the most because you don't see them as a family. This is the workplace. For those reasons, we're so proud.
Right, thank you so much, third negative, for the fine speech. Now inviting a negative reply.
Panels, there are largely two failures coming from affirmative. Firstly, them not properly explaining to you what collective responsibility even means. Because even at the very last leg of their case, affirmative flip tries to tell you that it's not just relationships we gain, but also better work. Like, what does this mean? This is a jargon that affirmative tries to throw around throughout the entire debate without explaining what this means, how exactly they are able to achieve this. Comparatively, we've explained to you from the beginning, and we've also played in their metric, which is individual incentive becomes higher to work hard because they realize that this benefit directly impacts them. The harm also directly impacts them. This means all of the individuals in this company is likely want to work hard. This means that working hard accumulates into the benefits for the company because individuals have that inherent mindset to have to work hard in order to get a better promotion, for instance. So what if what affirmative tries to champion is that they are far more efficient in the workplaces? We posit that we are able to do it better because our human nature prioritizes proximity, things that are close to us, like our monthly paychecks, for instance. But secondly, I have one burning question that I think affirmative severely fails in answering this entire debate. Why exactly is it so hard, and why is it so bad for individuals to prioritize their individual gain? Why is it so bad that I'm working hard every day for the sake of me gaining my promotion, making my parents proud? Insofar that they've given you no justification, we've proved to you that we are able to protect the most vulnerable workers, those who work hard without being properly credited in status quo. Under those two layers, affirmative should already lose this debate. But even if you don't buy that judge, I'm going to prove to you then why under two clashes we are still able to win this debate. First thing on accountability, because I think this is also something that has been thrown around throughout the three speakers of affirmative without giving you like a proper build-up of what their case truly wants. Because affirmative tries to tell you that you can at least check and balance other individuals in your project, for example. Two things. First, we tell you it is not your responsibility if the other person does their work or not. Because why is it your problem? Like, you're only adding burden to workers who are simply trying to survive the end of the month. But secondly, we've also flipped this and tell you the check and balances are harder to achieve because this collective action and collective responsibility on affirmative only blurs who does what. This means it's harder to fire people, harder to call people out. Comparatively, when it's for an individual gain, a person not submitting their deadline means that individual getting called out. On affirmative, it becomes he said, she said, pointing the blame over others, because obviously who would admit they failed to submit before the deadline on affirmative, right? They also try to push things like office politics, like nepotism, etc. But we flip this and tell you that evaluation becomes so much more subjective on affirmative because it is things like who was the best team player, who contributed the most in this team, which is often subjective from one person to another. You create things like favoritism and alliances that are often built by actors who have bad incentives on their side. So we think that we are the side who are able to lessen office politics, insofar that under this clash, we've proven to you two benefits that affirmative tries to champion to you, and yet how exactly we flip them and are able to achieve them better on our side, we think this clash ultimately falls towards negative side. But secondly, on the terms of toxic workplaces, we've given you two layers, Judge. First, how exactly are we able to reduce the likelihood of toxic workplaces? By things like informing stronger professionalism, stronger ties to your contract. We enforce the give and take rule in society. You reduce the it's okay just to overtime this time so we can achieve our monthly goal, because there are things that blurs your boundaries. Those are things you didn't sign up to when you first signed the contract towards this job. We tell you that we are able to reduce the likelihood of you being trapped in really bad workplace environments and really like abusive bosses. But secondly, at the very least, and they have yet to concede to this, by the way, there's a very real likelihood of you still having bad bosses anyways. At least we give a safety net for workers that want to leave. We remove the guilt and mental burden and the extra toll on these individuals. We tell them it's okay to leave and find somewhere better because there is no this we are a family narrative that exists on our side. Panels, this is what affects the people on the ground the most. The individuals who cannot leave due to guilt and a fear of not being able to get a job elsewhere. Weigh this on which side are able to help protect these individuals the most, because this is an exclusive benefit that we are only able to provide to you on side negative. Very, very proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, negative reply, for that fine speech. Now inviting affirmative reply to close the debate.
Hello, am I loud and audible?
Yes, you are.
Hello. Okay. If I do cut out because my connection is pretty bad, just tell me and I'll stop and I'll continue. It's on. I'm gonna set up my sorry, the background is kind of loud. Setting up my timer. I'm gonna start my speech and 3, 2, 1. It's clear that we take the cake on this debate. First, which side of the house increases employees' leverage in a company? That's one of the clashes. Why do we win this? Our side of the house has given you a model and a robust mechanism and an illustration of how working becomes team concentrated and employees are encouraged to do the best that they could. Op simply came into this debate saying that we live in a capitalistic society where every man has to fend for himself. Op's line of logic goes like this. If your main goal is to reach the highest position, you work better. You have more leverage and you don't get blamed for your team's fault. You shine more. First of all, is this really what the human condition wants? Where do we go after we have reached the highest position? Ascension and reaching the heavens. Unrealistic, Judge. Let's analyze this logic. A. Opposition said that our model causes the blame to be concentrated towards one person, causing us to blame ourselves. We have provided you a proper check and balance, which are our coworkers. When we have common goal, we are most likely to know we most likely know more the people who are working with us. In meetings and group chats, we know them more personally. Simply, our incentive here for the team is for the team to not fail. If we don't want the team to fail because we will fail with them, then we contact our coworkers. We reach out to them. We try our best to ask them what's wrong. Why are you lagging behind? Because of the pressure, this blame, then because the pressure of this blame, that employees grow more emphatic. Isn't that what we want? And even if the team is blamed, at the end of the day, because one person failed to do their job, we know who did this, and collectively we can report this to the HR to look out for them, to report this quote-unquote free-riding person that we have tried our best to help. If the workplace is individualistic, first, we know that we won't know the people we are working with that well because we're all fending for ourselves. Second, the relationships within each employee will be lessened. Third, if we fail, we fail by ourselves. This is why we win that clash. On a second clash of micromanaging and slacking off, they say that you have to take off everyone else's work because the work burden is increased. This is simply not true, because even if it's a collective responsibility, we have given you a concrete mechanism how each person will do their own specialty, do their job as the portion they have been given. You don't manage the other person's work. Having a common goal does not mean that you have to do the other people's work. This is a teamwork. Your portion had been divided to you from the very beginning. On the point of increasing office politics because of favoritism, this simply does not make any sense. If we want to reach a common goal, we won't sacrifice people who are trying their best because their success is also our success. Second, which side increases the quality of the individual? Which side gives you more personal growth? Our side gives you more encouragement towards the individual, and our side gives you more happiness. How? Because A, workers are more efficient. They say that individual gain, the opposition say that the individual gain or something inherently increases work quality. Then they do not have the guilt when you have to leave the company. Let's paint this picture then, Judge. When you go to work for the sake of reaching the highest position for your own gain, what is keeping you from giving up when you are the one getting blamed? You are the one doing your worst. What is keeping you from being given overtime, and what is keeping you from being overworked? You have no one but yourself to keep your engines running. You try to stand out and you chip away at the soul, hoping that by the time you reach the top, you won't live a life of misery. The objective in the first place is false. Secondly, does this really make you happier? Our side gives you a close analysis of collective work can make you work harder, can give you more effort because you have support. If the boss is giving you long hours, you have your workmates to help you. If there's one teammate that's not working well, they're not doing anything, you're encouraged to actually talk to them, not talking behind their backs and cause gossip and put them down. B, who gives a better model of not wanting to be judged? First of all, this is the oppositions that a late argument, which is first and second did not talk about anything about emotion and being judged. And even if they did, the elaboration is different. And they keep saying that we don't have an incentive to work better. But we have proposed to you, Judge, that having a collective work will push you to do it as well as you could. Why? Because if your team wins, then you win too. And if your team repeatedly wins, at the end of the day, this is also individual gain, but under a different and better perspective. This is not exclusive, Judge. This is why we win this debate. Oh, a couple things. They did not explain the company. Well, we explained what kind of company. They did not give any characteristics about the companies. They have not given that too. Our side proposes a world where work is parallel with good time, having fun, loving, and forgiving others. So that someday 9 to 5 can be romanticized for its good faith compared to quitting your jobs and living at the woods as a hermit. Thank